Women who declined a proposal, what happened? We were 19 and in a crazy on-off relationship. At the time of the proposal, we were off, and in my head, we were off for good. He came to my house and begged for me to come back, including a tear-filled proposal. I said no, got out of his truck, and went back inside. A month later, he told me he was going to be a dad. He knocked someone up around the time he wanted me back.
That sounds pretty complicated. It's wild how things can shift so quickly in relationships. You think it's over, then suddenly there's a dramatic proposal, and then news like that hits. Shows how unpredictable life can be. Sometimes people don't realize what they've lost until it's gone, but it seems like you made your choice clear. Life moves on, I guess.
Not me, but my mom. My mom's dad is a pretty successful businessman. My mom was working in some entry-level job in the same industry as my grandpa. The son of the owner of the company my mom worked for was a friend of hers. He asked her to hang out one night, not a date or anything. She had been dating my dad for years at the time, and ends up proposing to her because his dad was a successful businessman, and her dad was a successful businessman, so obviously they should get married. The words good breeding were thrown around. Future children were brought up. Obviously, she said no. TLDR, guy proposes to my mom to genetically engineer super business babies.
That's an interesting story. Your mom must have had quite the conversation after that. It's strange how people think family status should dictate relationships. Good on her for saying no. Sounds like she knew what she wanted. It's funny to imagine someone proposing based on family connections instead of actual feelings. Guess that kind of thing still happens today. Just wild how some folks think they can plan someone's future like that.
We've been dating long distance for 2 months when he called me and laid out his entire life plan for us. We were to marry immediately. I would graduate school, become pregnant a lot while using my art degree to support our kids and his suddenly desired career in full-time volunteer ministry work. Never mind our religious differences and my already stated intention to remain childless. He didn't propose. Propose un piesking. He just stated it as fact and was honestly surprised when I objected. None of this was in my life plan at all, nor was it discussed between us prior. He broke up with me very shortly afterward, citing my supposed inability to be a reasonable, rational person in light of my rejection of his unilateral propositions. Edit, clarity. We were both in our early 20s. Bullet. Dodged.
It sounds like an overwhelming situation. You start dating, and suddenly someone presents this whole future without any discussion. The mismatch in expectations can be tough. It's wild how he thought he could just lay it all out like that and assume you'd be on board. Honestly, it's better to know sooner than later when you're not on the same page. Guess you dodged a bullet there, for sure.
Amicho, if you're ever proposing and not 100% sure that he or she is going to say yes, then you're doing it wrong. It shouldn't be a surprise. You're not asking someone to the prom. Edit. Of course, the how and when can be a surprise. And you might always have that little nagging doubt. But I stand by what I said.
I get what you're saying. I think it's important to have that open communication before proposing. Like a friend of mine, they talked about it for months before making it official. It made the whole thing smoother. The surprise can be in how it happens, not if it's going to happen. That way, everyone feels secure, and expectations are clear. Makes sense, right?
I said no because I honestly was not prepared for such commitments so early and that fast. We had been seeing each other for about a year. I was 22, he was 24, and was always the super romantic kind of guy. Don't get me wrong, I love this, but he was always rushing things way too early and too soon. Luckily, he didn't plan a fancy proposal kind of thing, just surprise asked me at home, so I had to say no then. It didn't take long for us to break up eventually.
It sounds like you had a lot on your mind when he asked. Commitment can be a big step, and it's understandable to feel unprepared. It's tough when someone moves at a different pace in a relationship. Sometimes, taking things slow is what's needed. Breaking up can be hard, but it seems like it was the right choice for you in that moment. It must have been a tough situation to navigate.
We've been dating for 3 years, having some trouble, and he wasn't interested in making any changes to work things out. He basically broke up with me. Turned out I was relieved, then found out he was really just bluffing to teach me a lesson. When he figured out that I was okay with breaking up, he proposed. Really pissed me off. I actually responded with, "I have a date this weekend." I guess that was a little harsh, but don't propose out of desperation because you screwed up.
That sounds like a tough spot to be in. When someone doesn't appreciate what they have, they can turn things around in the worst way. It's wild how he tried to play a game and ended up losing. Your response shows you were done with the drama. Sometimes, people just don't realize the impact of their actions until it's too late. It's a lesson for him, but you handled it pretty well.
I said no, because we're not ready. We've been long distance for 3 years now, and although we love each other very much, he knows I won't marry him until we're both settled in together. Still, he asks almost 3 times a week, and it's become a bit of a laugh for us. He tries to sneak the question in without me noticing, and I add ridiculous conditions to my yes. I'm sure that when we decide to get married, he'll be too nervous to actually ask properly. He'll probably end up farting in bed and threatening to Dutch oven me if I don't say yes. It's not all bad in no world.
That's a pretty relatable situation. Long distance can stretch things out, and it's cool you both can joke about it. It sounds like you have some fun moments, even with the serious stuff. It makes sense to wait until you're settled. Those little antics, like sneaking in questions, keep the vibe light. And yeah, the way he might ask someday is probably going to be a story worth sharing later.
He asked me which Indiana Jones movies I liked. I told him the first and third ones were good, but didn't care for Temple of Doom. This was before the fourth one came out. Right then and there he got down on one knee and proposed to me with the taco he was about to eat. 5 years later, we're still dating. Edit. It was a hard-shell standard issue Taco Bell taco. It was later eaten, but I don't remember by who. The whole thing was overshadowed when we walked outside and found the physics department assembling a trebuchet. The answer was someday. Being college students at the time and now working professionals were not in a good financial or career spot to get married yet.
That's a pretty unique proposal. It's funny how something like a taco can turn into a memorable moment. 5 years is a solid stretch, too. College life has its quirks, like stumbling onto a trebuchet project. Sounds like you've both got some patience about the marriage thing, which is probably wise given where you're at now. All in all, a nice little story to look back on.
I was dating a guy during the end of my senior year of high school. I was 18, he was 19. He proposed after a few months of dating. Looking back in it, I think he was afraid I was going to move away to go to college and meet/date other guys. Marriage would have been his way to keep me forever. I said no, because I knew I was too young, and I didn't think he was the kind of person you want to make a life with. We continued to date for a while. We eventually broke up because he was just too insecure. He always talked about how I was going to break up with him eventually for someone better. I took some time off before I started college, but I did have several other boyfriends during college and after. I wasn't really interested in marriage when I was younger. Now I'm 31 and was married last year. The guy who proposed at 19 is married to someone else with a few kids. I know he proposed to other girls too. I think he was just the kind of person who desperately wanted to marry anyone, where I was more selective.
It's interesting how life turns out. You were young and had a good grasp on what you wanted. Saying no to that proposal showed maturity. It's common for people to rush into things out of fear. It's cool to see you took your time and found the right person for marriage later on. That guy you dated sounds like he was just looking for security. Life moves on, and it's good to reflect on those choices.
He asked me after dating for only 5 months, and 2 of those months I had been out of state, so I certainly didn't feel like I knew him well enough to make that kind of commitment. We broke up right after that. About 9 months later, he was married to someone else. I think he just wanted to be married, and it didn't matter to whom.
It's interesting how quickly people can move on. Seems like he wasn't really looking for the right person, just the title of being married. It's a reminder that sometimes folks are more focused on the idea of a relationship rather than the actual connection. I guess it's good you didn't rush into anything serious.
My mom said no to my dad the first time he asked. Might have something to do with the fact that he called her up exceptionally drunk. His best mate was in the background, egging him on, do it. When Dad got back, he had not a clue what he had done. So Mom went and bought herself a ring with Dad's credit card, gave it to him, and then said, "Now do it properly."
That's a pretty relatable story. You can see how mixed signals can lead to some funny situations. It's wild how a drunken call can turn into a life decision. And the clever way your mom handled it by getting her own ring shows she knew what she wanted. It's a good example of how sometimes you have to take matters into your own hands.
I had someone, a friend I'd never dated, propose to me after high school. I kind of laughed it off at first. Where I live, people don't get married that young. But he was devastated, and he kept calling me to ask if I'd change my mind. I told him no, and I asked him to move on with his life. But he kept telling me he wouldn't take no for an answer. Unfortunately, I had to get a restraining order against him. We haven't spoken since. I still feel bad about it.
It's tough when a friendship takes that turn. You think it's harmless, then suddenly it gets serious. I can see how you'd feel conflicted. Sometimes emotions don't sync up, and it can create a mess. It's a shame things escalated to a restraining order. You might feel guilty, but you have to prioritize your well-being. Hopefully, he finds peace, and you can move forward too.
We were 19. He proposed with a cubic zirconia ring and pretended to impress me and all of our friends by stating it was real. In general, he was a chronic liar and cheater, very insecure, and seemed to be the type who wanted to trap someone into marriage. I was much more insecure and passive then. He got married 2 months ago. Thank God I said no.
That's an interesting story. It sounds like you dodged a bullet there. It's tough when someone tries to impress with fake gestures, especially in a relationship. You were smart to recognize what was happening and step back. Sometimes it takes time to see the red flags, but it seems you made the right choice for yourself. Moving on from that could only lead to something better.
It was too soon. We had only been dating for 9 months. I liked him, but wasn't sure that I was ready for marriage. Plus, I was too young. But we kept dating, and 6 months later moved in together. When he asked a year later, I said yes. Thank goodness he didn't make a production of the first or second proposal.
It's interesting how relationships evolve. Sometimes you're not ready for big steps, but as things progress, your feelings can change. Moving in together often shifts the dynamic. It's good that he kept it low-key with the proposals. That can make things feel more genuine. It seems like you figured things out together over time, which is important.
5 or 6 years ago, in the grocery store, a little girl of 4 or 5 waddled up to me while I was looking over the pasta sauce, or whatever, and grabbed my leg in the cutest little bear hug ever. I was kind of surprised and looked down, and she said, "Will you marry me?" Her mother came hustling over and apologized. She was mortified. It made my night. Not to sound creepy, but I think about those two every now and again. I hope they're doing okay, wherever they are.
That's a nice story. Kids can be really spontaneous and innocent. That little girl's boldness must have caught you off guard. It's cool that you remember them after all this time. It probably left a good impression on you, showing how unexpected moments can brighten up a day. Hope they're doing well too. Little things like that stick with you, huh?
Not me personally, but one of my close girlfriends. She was dating this guy for 8 years. He proposed. She said no because he wasn't going anywhere with his life. Not sure if true. I only know he's been working in a retail store for years and gained a lot of weight. Her saying no was just too hard to recover from, and they broke up. He's been doing a Facebook rampage about her, starting to work out and stuff, while she found someone who she seems to love dearly.
It's kind of a common story. My friend was with a guy for years, then turned him down when he proposed. He didn't seem to have much direction, which made sense to her. After the breakup, he went on a spree posting about her and trying to change things about himself. Meanwhile, she moved on and found someone who makes her happy. It's interesting how people react differently to a breakup.
I found out from a blabbermouth, but fortuitously so friend of ours, that he was planning to propose over a trip, and the first thing I thought was, I wonder how I'd make sure I kept the dog in the divorce. So, since I couldn't get the money back for the trip, which was like 2 to 3 days from finding this out, I waited until we got on the plane, got fake drunk, and fake railed against the institution of marriage, saying how glad I was that we were both evolved beyond such a stupid ritual. Looking back, it was a really immature way to handle it, but it was effective, and we still had a good trip. At least better than if we had been out like 4K on the trip. Buy travel insurance, kiddies. 6 years later, he's been married and divorced twice. He's really not a bad guy, but I don't think he's built for long-term relationships. And our dog is now my dog.
That's an interesting trip story. It's wild how things can shift with friendships and relationships over time. I get the thought about keeping the dog, though. It's funny how you managed to navigate that whole situation, even if it was a bit immature. But sometimes, you just gotta roll with it. Now you're the proud owner of the dog. Life has a way of working itself out like that.
Someone I had been dating for 2 months a ski to marry him once. He was needy and clingy and didn't understand that I was 23 and not even close to being ready, and I saw our relationship as a summer fling before leaving to finish school. He showed up at my apartment after the breakup. He stalked and called me until I said I would get a restraining order. Saw him in a restaurant a couple years ago. I could tell he wanted to say something to me, but I was happy he left. We were in 2 different places in our lives, and I never led him on or told him I loved him. It was just awkward.
That sounds like a tough situation. It can be hard when someone wants more than you're ready to give. The clinginess really throws things off. It's good you set boundaries, even if it escalated to that point. Running into them later must have been weird, knowing he still had feelings. Those kinds of experiences shape how we handle relationships later on. Just glad you're in a better place now.
I had been dating him for a few years. Within the last year, things got toxic. I was getting scared for my life and planning on leaving, but didn't know where to go or how to get anywhere. He'd cut me off from all my friends and family, would take my money as soon as I got paid. I didn't have a car or a license. Living halfway across the country from anyone I knew growing up. He started spewing about all the terrible things he had done to me and how I managed to stay with him anyways. And at that moment, he realized how much he loved me. Turned to me, asked me to marry him. No kind gestures, ring, not even kneeling. I was so demoralized by his rant, I hadn't cared anymore if he went too far and killed me. I told him no, and that I was done with him. Best decision of my life. Still alive and doing much better years later. I'm now self-sufficient and engaged to a genuinely kind-hearted man.
It's good to hear you got out of that situation. Sounds tough. That kind of control can really mess with your mind. Saying no to his proposal must have taken a lot of strength. It's even better that you're in a healthier relationship now. Being self-sufficient is important. It's wild how things can change for the better. I'm glad you're doing well these days. Staying strong and moving on matters.
Showed up unannounced, months after our breakup when I had a new boyfriend. Tells me to check Facebook. Oh, you have a friend request. I check request. A fellow named Will You. Maram has requested me as a friend. Secretly, he knows this is his account that was created to sneakily impress me with creativity. Looks at me. My face is red, and I'm shaking my head no. He leaves and drives home. Home is 5 hours away in a blizzard. Sigh. He tried. We're still friends, somehow. Our lifestyles just didn't sync up. He was a laborer who worked far from my city that I attended university, plus had a thing for always being high. Rumors he had cheated on me. Not something I was used to or wanted to grow accustomed to, as an everyday thing, for life.
That's a wild story. Shows how some people can't really let go. It's funny how he thought a friend request would win you back. I guess creativity doesn't always translate to connection. It's cool that you're still friends, but it sounds like you dodged a bullet. The distance and lifestyle just weren't going to make it work. Sometimes it's just better to move on.
I turned down 2 proposals. One from a guy who I'd been dating for 3 months. I went on a long trip, and while I was gone, I had been having serious doubts about the viability of the relationship. About 3 weeks out when I phoned him, this was before cell phones, and I was in a place where I could only call once a week or so, he decided to propose, a complete surprise to me. I told him that I'd give him an answer when I got back in a week, because I was so surprised, and it wasn't a discussion I wanted to have over the phone. I got back, took one look at him, and all doubt in my mind evaporated. I definitely didn't want to marry him. Obviously, we broke up. Another proposal I turned down was from a guy I'd been dating for a few years, but not seriously. He wanted to settle down. I didn't. I was in my early 20s. He was in his late 30s. He proposed. I said no. We broke up. Eventually, I did marry, though, and I'm very happy.
It's interesting how relationships can change over time. Turning down proposals must have been tough, especially when both guys had different expectations. It's good that you recognized what you really wanted. Not everyone finds the right match early on. Eventually settling down seems to have worked out for you, though, which is nice. It's all about timing and knowing yourself, I guess.
Twice, sort of. I had an ex tell me he wanted to leave his current girlfriend of several years and elope with me. I said no. Then I had him so propose to me on Valentine's Day while laying in bed. I told him no, and that we were too young and still in college, so we weren't set up enough, but I knew that I didn't want to marry him. We broke up 6 months or so later. Both of these seemed very spontaneous, not planned or thought out though, so I don't know if it really counts.
It's interesting how those moments can feel so urgent but also out of the blue. Someone wanting to leave their partner for you is a lot to process. Saying no in both cases shows you knew where you stood, even if they didn't. It's clear you weren't ready for either relationship to go to that next step. Sometimes, knowing it's not right is better than just going along with it.
My grandpa proposed to my grandma on their 3rd date. Mind you, he was in the Air Force at the time, and their dates were months apart. She said she turned him down the first time. I believe she turned him down one more time, and then accepted on the 3rd time. They were married for 56 years until he died in 2013. They did that lovey-dovey stuff all the time, and were probably the closest thing to soulmates I've seen in real life.
That's kind of wild how your grandpa proposed so quickly. I guess sometimes it just clicks, even if the timing seems off. It's nice to hear they had a long marriage after all that. Soulmates really do seem hard to find, but it sounds like they had something special. It must be cool to have such a strong example of love in your family.
I had an ambitious guy propose to me within 10 minutes of our first date. If that weren't awkward enough, the barista who was within earshot kept yelping, "Oh girl, say yes. Say yes." It really made me feel like a total tool when I chucked the deuce at him and bolted out of the Starbucks. Even worse was that this guy and I had similar work networks, so I would see him frequently.
That's quite the first date. Proposing so quickly is definitely a bold move, especially in a public place. Having the barista hyping it up must have added to the awkward vibe. It's tough navigating those work connections afterward. Seeing him around must have made things a bit uncomfortable. Sometimes it's good to trust your gut and leave a situation that doesn't feel right.
I said no once because he proposed after around 4 months, drunkenly. It ended well. We ended up getting married about 8 months after that, after a long, heavy, sober discussion. Prior to that, I had turned down a proposal because, simply, I didn't want to marry him and think it's manipulative and cruel to propose marriage when you're not 100% on the same page. I loved him deeply, but I wanted to do me and move and be free during my 20s. It was bittersweet, and I truly hope that he's happy. It was one of the toughest things I've ever done, but I'm so glad that I did.
It's interesting how proposals can come at unexpected times. Turning him down shows how important it is to be clear about your feelings. Choosing to focus on yourself in your 20s was a wise decision. It's tough to make those calls, but it sounds like it worked out in the end. Marrying him after that sober talk means you both found common ground eventually. Hope he's doing well too. Life's about those choices, I guess.
I had a guy propose to me at the gas station while I was getting gas, and we were going out only for 2 months. Also, I was young and still in college. Since his car broke down, I picked him up for our date, and at the end I stopped to get gas, and he just randomly blurted it out. He did not have a ring, but he said if I say yes, he would go buy a ring for me the next day. A wedding was just not in my plans at that time.
That's a wild story. A proposal at a gas station is pretty unexpected. I mean, 2 months in and he's already thinking about marriage. No ring makes it even weirder. I get that you were still in college and not looking for that kind of commitment. It's funny how some people move fast while others take their time. Just shows how different everyone's life plans can be.
I was 16. We had been dating almost a year, and yeah, we were young, but had talked about a maybe one day kind of thing. I didn't think anything of the conversation until he got down on one knee in my living room while we were watching a movie, presented a purple butterfly ring, and asked me to marry him. I said no, came up with some lame, not now, too young, maybe later, kind of thing. We broke up shortly after.
That's a pretty intense moment for 16. It's wild how serious things can feel at that age. The ring sounds unique, but it's good you recognize your own feelings. Not everyone is ready for that step, even if the relationship seems solid. Breaking up after that must have been tough, but it sounds like you made the right call for yourself. Life goes on, I guess.
We were a couple months into the relationship, and he'd whittled down my confidence and self-assurance from marriage isn't a high priority, give it a few years of solid relationship. And by the way, I'm never having children, to you're marrying me next June, this is your engagement ring, we're having 7. Haha, just kidding. Really, 2 children, biologically, we just have to wait for my divorce to finalize. The sticking point was I wouldn't be engaged officially or wear a ring till he was legally single. That's when I started to really understand that I was dating a douche. I fully admit, I'm a little slow sometimes.
It sounds like you were in a rough spot. It's wild how quickly someone can switch from cool to controlling. That realization must have hit hard, especially considering the shift in your values. It's good you held your ground about the engagement status. Better to see the signs early than later, I guess. Relationships can be complicated, and sometimes you just end up learning the hard way. Glad you recognized it in time.
The start of his proposal was a confession of cheating. He called me at 3 a.m., drunk, on a night before I had a big exam, and decided to tell me he just couldn't bear to cheat on me anymore. He then decided to lay out his life plan for us. I would move back home, I was in college, be a stay-at-home mom, and he would become a cop. I believe he actually used the phrase barefoot and pregnant. He was mad when I said no.
That's a wild situation. Getting a call like that at 3 a.m., especially right before an exam, must have been rough. It's surprising how some people think they can just pivot like that. The whole barefoot and pregnant line feels outdated too. It's strange he expected you to just go along with it. I guess not everyone understands what a partnership really means.
We'd been married for many years, and I developed a mold allergy from the place we lived in. This allergy became chronic until I had constant shortness of breath. Even after getting rid of the mold, we were told that it could take months before all the spores would be gone, and I could expect to continue being sick until then. She hated change and was frightened by it. So when I explained to her that we should move, she flat out rejected the idea. "Well, I want to move," I said. "Well, I want a divorce," she answered. That was her trump card. She figured I would back down. But to me, this was just another example of how she always got her way and never seemed to care whether I was happy or not. I accept. I answered I moved out, and we were divorced not 2 months later. I know this was about proposal rejection, but I figured divorce acceptance has to be equivalent.
It's interesting how life can twist in unexpected ways. When health issues come into play, priorities often change. In this case, the need for change was key, but it clashed hard with her fears. The response to such a serious situation, like a divorce, usually reveals a lot about a relationship. It's a point where being true to oneself leads to tough but necessary choices. Sometimes, endings are a form of liberation.
Not a woman. I was on exchange in the US on a student visa and met a girl on the border of Mexico. Told her I couldn't go to Mexico because I wouldn't be allowed in on my visum. She said that was not a problem. She would just marry me and I would get in as a US citizen. I declined. Later she asked me how long I was going to stay in the US. I told her a couple of months. Unless she married me, then I would have to stay. She declined. We both got turned down within about an hour of each other. Sad face. Edit. In case it's not clear from the text, I should mention we met that night at a bar.
Sounds like a wild night at the bar. You met this girl, and she offered a pretty big solution to your visa issue. It's kind of funny that you both ended up turning each other down for marriage. Those quick connections can be strange. I guess both of you were just looking for a good time without the complications. Just a night to remember, or maybe forget.
Not my story, but I work at Olive Garden, and one time somebody came in and asked us to do the ring and the champagne glass thing. I didn't see it because I work in the back, but I still remember the server coming back with this look on her face. Everyone who didn't see it started pestering her, asking her how it went, and she just says, "I don't think very well." As soon as she saw the champagne glass, she said, "Oh no," and I got the heck out of there as fast as possible. We found out after the fact that this was not the first time he had proposed to her either. Throughout all of this, we asked ourselves the exact same question that I'm sure everyone who finished reading it asked. Why would you propose at Olive Garden? The Olive Garden I work at is actually pretty good with decent quality fake Italian food, but seriously? And why are you still dating some guy that has apparently proposed to you multiple times at places probably just like Olive Garden?
It's kind of funny, really. So many people dream of grand proposals, yet this guy picked Olive Garden. The server's reaction was priceless. I can just imagine the look on her face when she heard, "Oh no." It makes me wonder about their relationship too. How could you keep saying yes to someone who's been at it multiple times and in such a casual spot? Just odd choices all around, I guess.
Please consider subscribing if you enjoyed. Love.